Okay, so let's see the practical application we are going to develop now.
Well, so that we will be able we have a simple calculator, and we are able to add, subtract, multiply, and divide and clear, right?
Okay, so let's continue to develop this application now.
Hi everyone. The lesson is Simple Calculate app part 1, and developing the user interface of the app and Android. We'll be using these tools in this lecture, and make sure to cover these prerequisite lessons before you start this lesson. So you can find the link to these lessons in the description section of this video. We'll be developing a calculate app, and we'll be creating the user interface for that. As usual, it's going to be practical demonstrations. So let's start Android Studio, and then let's start a new project. Select empty activity and click next. And now you should give a name and a location for the project. Make sure to select the language as Java and keep the default minimum SDK version and click finish. So it's creating the project, and as soon as the project gets created, you will see that the Gradle scripts will be running. So just give it a little bit of time for the scripts to finish its execution. So now it has created the main activity as usual, and let's expand the resources and the layout, the activity main.xml. So these are the default files which will get created. So let's go and create the user interface in the XML file. So I will double click the XML file. Then as usual, a couple of things to be done. First, make sure click the design surface, and when you are designing, make sure it's going to be the blueprint, right? And the default text view, you can select on the component tree and delete it. And then let's do a few more things, and let's select from the device for preview. Let's select say Pixel XL. So this gives pixel perfect rendering, right? Okay, so those are the basic stuff, and let's give the default margins as 16, right? So these are the basic stuff you would do, right? And let's talk about this in a little while, disabling auto connection to the page. But I didn't click it, I just moved the mouse, that's it. Okay, so now we should start creating the interface. So let's click on text, and first of all, let's say you want a label to say it's a calculator. So just click on text view and drag it. You can see it shows the guidelines for centering, right? Okay, just place it right now. As soon as I placed it, you can see that it has applied certain constraints right over here. So it says constraints and end of the parent and start of the parent. So let's talk about that. That's because I have and kept this, the auto connection to parent. I have not disabled it. That's why it's getting created. That's fine. And then let's give let's drag it to the top from here. Okay, awesome. And then first of all, I want to give let's run this immediately, right? So say that I want to run this. So let's create a new virtual device. I got a few, but I would like to create one for Pixel XL because I'm designing it on the Pixel XL. Let's give a try for that. So just say tools, AVD manager, and then click create virtual device. As you can see, I already have, so I really don't need to do this, but I would like to get that Pixel XL device also up and running. So okay, Pixel XL, and then click next, and then select okay, the x86 image, right? Okay, let's click next, Pixel XL API 30, and just click finish, right? So it created the Pixel XL virtual device. So let's run that emulator by clicking this button over here. So you can see over here it's starting the AVD. AVD stands for Android Virtual Device. Okay, so it starts the emulator. and it's loading the Pixel XL device, right? So let's close this in the meantime, right? And then I'm expecting to see just the text view being displayed over here, right? Let's give it a little while. So you can see the device is getting loaded. It will take a little more time for completion of the loading. Okay, so the device got loaded. Now let's click the run button from here and let's deploy our application. So as you can see, the Gradle build has started running. So the Gradle will now deploy this app into the emulator, and then it will come in the output. Let's give it a little bit of time. So I got the message Gradle invocation finished, right? Okay, awesome. So the text view is appears here, right? Okay. So what I want to do is now I want to change, and I want to say let's say I want to say it's my calculator, right? So then as usual you will be going and defining so that means it's now I'm talking about UI strings. So if you remember the one of the previous lessons in this series, we declared the UI strings in values strings XML. So if you are not familiar of this, please have a look at the previous lessons, right, about this. So over here what we did was we clicked on open editor, and then we went to translations editor, right, and then we click the plus button, and then we give a key and a value. So I just gave the key as calculator title and just gave the value as my calculator. So then as you remember in previous lessons, then you will be coming back to the interface, and then you will be clicking on the text, and you will delete the existing one, and you will click on pick a resource. Then from here you can click the calculator title which you just created, right? So now so this is we call it as you how you deal with UI strings, right? Awesome, right? And then certain things and a few more things like text appearance. So we'll give the text size. So let's give a little bit larger size, and let's give text color, right? So let's give some color over here, and few more properties, and let's click the text style to be bold, right? Okay, so it's few basic stuff, and then quickly let's run this, right? So to see whether, let me stop this and click the run button. So it should the changes should appear in a little while, right? Awesome. So I can see my calculator. Now let's quickly finish the calculator. So I will once again go to the text, once again get another text view, right? Okay, so just before that, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to disable this auto connection to parent, and then I'm going to give the constraints by myself. So I'm going to disable it so that when I place a text, it doesn't get auto connected to the parent, right? So now let me put it over here, and before I give the constraints, let's once again give couple of things. Let's make the text style bold, right? So I want to give some common properties, and let's okay, let's, yeah, that's good. Let's increase the size a little bit. Okay, okay, so I just make it bold, and that's right? And then now when I'm constraining, yes, let's constrain this to the left hand side. Okay, let's give maybe with larger value, say okay 32 for example. And then so when I'm constraining this to the top, so the best practice now is you don't constrain this to the top parent. What you do is you constrain it to the nearest sibling, right? So which is this one. So you will be constraining this to the nearest the sibling, the height of the nearest sibling, right? Likewise, right? And then now you got the constraint created. So let's say let's put some extra value, right? I put a 50, right? I just typed, right? Awesome. So now you got that constraint, right? And let's now put a text field, right? So to enter the data values, so let's get a plain text. So this is going to be a text box. Earlier it was a text view I used. Now I'm going to use plain text. So let's drag the plain text right over here, right? And then once again, when you constrain, you will be constraining this to the nearest neighbor. So in other words, nearest sibling, right? So you don't constrain this to top left of the container, parent container. So what you do is you just constrain this to the left of it, and then you just move it so that let's do it this way. So you could just click here, and then you can say increase it like this, right? Okay, so let's give, that's great, right? Okay, and then let's constrain this horizontally into the text view, right? So what you do is so you right click and you will say show baseline, right? And then what you do is you will drag this into the baseline of this, right? So that the two get constrained horizontally, so that the text comes in the same level, right? Awesome. Now let's run this and see the outcome. Okay, see, it works. So I got the text view, and over here I can type something, but now I have to work on the UI strings, right? So let's once again go into the UI strings, which means we'll go to the strings.xml, click open editor, and then translation editor, click plus, and then give a key and a value. I just gave the key as number one label and the value as number one. So it's number one label. So if I go to the layout now, if I click on the label, the text, delete this, then pick a resource, number one label, and click on the text, and the text we will be deleting, right? Okay, let's run this now. So now it's so we are dealing with UI strings as well. Okay, so we got the number one. Now let's go and do the rest for the rest. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select this and copy, because I have given certain properties like font size and color. So I want the same stuff to come. So I'm going to copy, Control C from the keyboard, and click and Control V. So paste it from the keyboard, right? So I got it. Then I'm going to move it, right? So basically, so I just copied and pasted. So I'm getting identical text box, meaning what you call a label, right? So then this is 32. So let's click on this. Let's make it something like a fixed size. Let's make it 40. In that case, this also will, let's say this is 40, and then this has been constrained. So if you can see, because I copied this and placed it here, this has been constrained to the my calculator label. But normally you don't constrain this label into the into this label. You constrain it as a best practice to the nearest sibling, which means into the label over here, number one, right? So I'm going to delete this constraint and then put it back. So I'm going to click this, and I'm going to click on this constraint, right? This one, and I'm going to right click and say clear constraints for selection. So it cleared the constraints, right? So then what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag this, just the constraint, right? Drag it and then put a value of say 40, and then constrain this to this label, and let's put this, let's put a value of 50 from the top, right? Awesome. And then same thing can be done, but text box I didn't make much changes, so let me get a plain text and let's place it here, right? Okay, so Then once again, this one I'm going to constrain to the nearest neighbor, which is this, and then put a value of 50 because that's what I have done for the one before. And then once again, this, let's constrain this horizontally to this text box. So right click and say show baseline, and then drag this to the baseline of this, right? Okay, so let's do the same thing for another text box. Okay, so I just created that as usual, as same, and then add the constraints. Now let's add the UI string. So strings.xml, once again open editor, translation editor, click plus, let's give them now. So I added two key value pairs, one number 2 label and answer label, and gave them these values like number 2 and answer. Then let's go to the XML. Let's click on this and let's click on the text. Let's click on this and let's select click on the text, and let's click on the resource and number 2 label, this one. Click on this, pick a resource on the text, that is going to be the answer label, and let's run this now, right? So it should show me number 1, number 2 and the answer, right? Awesome. And then the names has to be adjusted. Let's go and work on that. The text properties of the text boxes. So just once again, so as you can see, once again, like the text boxes are not aligned, right? The text boxes. So there's a trick for that. So what you can do is you can have somewhat larger gap for text box 1, and then you can align text box 2 and 3 into text box 1. So what I mean is you can click on text box 1 and then you can increase the constraint width for text box 1, and then you can click on this text box, click on this constraint, and you can delete it by pressing the delete key from the keyboard. So press the delete key from the keyboard and click this, select the constraint and press the delete key, right? And then you can constrain this to the front of text box 1, right? So you constrained it to the front of text box 1. Let's move it just a bit. So this one also you can constrain it to the front of text box. Let's give a try now. Let's run this. Let's see what's happening, right? So still there is a small adjustment need to be done, right? So let's work on that now. So I deleted the constraints once again, and now I'm going to show you again. So you just select this and drag it to this, right? And then you can see you have constrained to the start, this text box to the start of this one, but there's a small gap here, so you make it 0, right? Same here, constrain this to this, but as you can see there's a small gap here, so make it 0, right? So now let's run this and see what's happening. So this teaches you about the constraints, right? So now the baseline, next thing is the baseline. So I have to now click on this, let's say right click, say show baseline, right? And then constrain it to the baseline of this. Same here, right click, show baseline, and then constrain it to the baseline of this. Now let's run this once again. So the purpose of this lesson is also to make sure that you become more and more familiar with these constraints, right? Okay, awesome. Now we have to place a button, a couple of buttons, right? So let's go into buttons, press the button, and let's place a button over here, right? And let's give some properties for the button, right? So let's say I want to be of font size 18, and let's say I want it to be having a color, say red, for example, right? Just example, right? Let's say the style is bold and italic, right? Okay, so I just gave a couple of stuff. Let's run and see. So I just place the button, and as you can see, when I run the button without adding any constraints, the button is placed at the top left. So that is because I did not add any constraints. So now let's add the constraints. So as usual, you add constraints to the nearest sibling, right? So let's add this to this, and then let's increase this to be 50, and then you constrain this to the what do you call parent. But instead of constrain to the parent, you can constrain this if you want to the top sibling, right? See over here as well. So now for example, the label I have constrained it to the left, right, of the container. But the best practice would be, because I already constrained the first label to the parent, you don't constrain the second label to the parent. So let me click this constraint and click the delete key. What you do is you constrain this to the beginning of the label, right, and then you just remove the front space. Okay, so just let me undo it for a second. So I have to undo it. So over here, just click this first and then make it 0, right? Same here, click on this constraint at the first constraint, delete it, right, and then drag it and constrain it to the siblings front of the sibling, right, and then click on this label and delete this top space, right? Okay, the front space. Same here. Now for the button, now I will be constraining this to this label over here, and then just select this and make sure you delete the front space, right? Just make it 0, right? So the idea is, when you constrain, you will be constraining the top label into the parent container, then the next label immediately constrain to that, and maybe this label, the left hand side, you will constrain it to the container, right? But after that, these labels you will constrain it to the front of this label, and then this one to the front of this label likewise, right? So this is the best practice. So let's run this now first to see whether the button is now in the right place. And the question is, why do you do it this way, right? You can see the button. Why do you do it this way is, why do I say that it's a best practice is, now if you move this label, let's say you want to move it by say 100 pixels, right? Look at the property palette, 100 pixels. If I press enter, everything gets moved, right? See, then let's say if you want to move this label, let's click on this, and let's say you want to move it by say lesser amount, say 10 pixels, then everything gets shifted. So as you can see, so that is why the best practice is, you don't constrain everything to the parent container. You constrain only one or two, and then you constrain all the other components to the siblings, so that when you change the width like I did now, or the space for the corner components, then everything gets changed, so that you don't have to change one by one. Because if you had constrained each of these labels to the container, then this won't happen, because then only this one would have been shifted to the left, but not this one. So you have to go and click one by one and then change. But now you don't have to do it, because you have just constrained only one or two, the top ones, to the parent, and the rest you have constrained to those siblings. So when you change the width of the topmost ones, then everything gets changed, right? So I will undo this, because I don't want this change, right? So I'm undoing, edit, undo. But now you understand why I said it's a best practice, right? Awesome. Now we have to give the UI strings for the button as well, right? but let's add the other buttons, right? So now, because I have done some format changes for this, applied some font colors and stuff, I will be copying this button. So I will click the button and Control C from the keyboard, or you can right click and say copy, and then right click and say paste, right? Right click, paste, right click, paste, let's say like this, right? And then you'll have to delete the constraints of these buttons, right? So click on the button, right? So what I want is I'm going to remove the constraints, right? So right click and say clear the constraints. This one was same, right click, clear the constraints, select this, right click, clear the constraints, select this, right click and clear the constraints, right? Now click on the button, just constrain it to the sibling, just over here, and then constrain this. First of all, let's say, let's make it 30, right? And then right click on the button and say show baseline, and then constrain this to the baseline of this. Let's do the same here, select the button, constrain it to the sibling, and just give a value of 30, and then right click on the button, show baseline, and then drag it to the baseline of this, so they get line. Same here, this one, let's constrain, now this one, let's constrain it to the, hold on, let's constrain this to the front of this button, right? Awesome. And then make it 0 over here, and then the height there should be you have to constrain it to this, right? And let's do some, you have to be a bit careful when you do this stuff. So select this, 30, right? Awesome. This one should be 30 as well, right? Okay, and then this one the same, just constrain it to this, and let's say 30, then select this, right click, show baseline, then drag it to this, constrain to the baseline, right? Awesome. Now we have to give the UI strings, right? So go to the strings.xml, right? Open editor, translation editor, click plus, and let's give some key value pairs. So I give the key as btn add text, and I can say either add or whatever it is, so plus, whatever you would like to put it there, and click OK, and then add the other stuff as well, the other labels for the other buttons. Then the final one I added is the btn clear text as clear. Then go to the activity main.xml and click on the buttons, then click on the text, delete the existing text, pick a resource, right? Then that's the add, so select it as btn add text and click OK. Now do the same thing for all the buttons one by one. So the next button is btn subtract text, subtext, this one, btn mul text, this one, btn div text, this one, final button, click on this btn clear text. Now let's run this, right? So this, so why do we do this with UI strings? Have a look at our previous lesson on that, right? And once again, to remind you, why did we go to the strings XML and do this? Why did we add all this? Why did we go to the editor and add everything? And then why did we come here and put it, and now we are getting it, right? That is for universal application design, right? So that this the text in the user interface is not not tightly coupled to the property palette. Instead of that, you are reading them from a XML file, so that it makes it a universal app. So whenever you want to change the user interface text, you don't have to touch the GUI part. You just go and update the XML, because the GUI is referring to the XML to get the UI strings, right? So that is why you do it this way, right? Awesome. So now you got the app. You will be able to put the numbers, right? You will, let's click down. So only thing, the plus, these buttons are not working yet, right? And the clear button is also not working yet. That's our next task. So we did the we completed the practical demonstration, and we learn about creating the user interface, and you learn more about adding constraints. It's very important to add the constraints this way, so that you get, like, once again, universal app. We will be learning more about that in another lesson. You can find the link to download the source code for these practicals done in the description of the video. So we'll be using Android Developer Docs and API in when we complete this lesson, right? So have a look at our other videos and practicals, and make sure to look at the next lesson to complete this app. We are very excited to see you in the next lesson, and see you in the next lesson.